Hey guys, welcome back to another video. It's been a while. I haven't really been posting so much since the Premier League has been out on a break, but I'm super excited to be back with this next guest. I promised you guys awesome guests, and I really feel like I have delivered on this one because I'm joined by sports journalist Grant Wahl. Grant, thank you so much for joining me today. How's it going?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me on your show, and congratulations on everything you've been doing.
Oh, thank you. It means a lot. We've been interacting for a while on Twitter, so it's really great to finally be able to meet you. I was going to say in person, but on chat and to have you
Close.
on. So, yeah, close enough these days. So guys, we're going to be talking a lot about Grant's career. He has some really interesting stories to share as well. And then I also do want to get his take on some US men's national team stuff, since that is a hot topic right now. So Grant, the first thing that I wanted to ask you, we're both American. There's a lot of sports in the US. So how did you find your love of football, or as we call it, soccer?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's got a story, right? So for me, I grew up playing the sport like a lot of Americans, and like a lot of American kids, quit playing when I was about 14 years old, and then got into other sports for high school. So basketball, track and field, cross country were my sports that I actually did later on. But I remained interested in soccer, and I grew up in the 80s in Kansas City, when indoor soccer was actually more popular than outdoor soccer. And I remember going to indoor games in the 80s and really enjoying that. The first big outdoor soccer that I watched event-wise was the 1990 World Cup. So I was in high school. The US was in that tournament for the first time in 40 years. And I watched almost all of the games of the tournament, because it was really hard to watch outdoor soccer on television in the United States at the time. And so the World Cup provided an opportunity, and it kind of went from there. And I can remember I had decided that I wanted to be a sports journalist. I wasn't sure soccer was where I was going to go. Like basketball was bigger for me at the time. And I ended up going to college at Princeton and covering the soccer team there for the student newspaper, coached by Bob Bradley, who would eventually become the U.S. men's national team coach, coached in the Premier League briefly with Swansea. And he really did a lot to sort of, work with me on my interest in the sport. He helped me connect me with clubs in Argentina, and I ended up doing my senior thesis in college on politics and soccer in Argentina. Lived there for 3 months. And by the time I got to Sports Illustrated, I was kind of viewed as a soccer guy. So whenever we covered the sport, which wasn't very often in those days in the 90s, I would get opportunities. My first World Cup was 98 in France to cover. And then I covered the 99 Women's World Cup, which became a big cultural event in the United States that transcended the sport. And then I was off and running. And by 2009 was when I went full-time soccer and stopped doing basketball, and I've been just doing it ever since.
That's so cool. It's interesting that you say that, because I remember growing up, like you said, I don't remember really seeing soccer or football on TV all that much, but I remember I actually watched a lot of the women's game before I started watching the men's game. And my favorite player when I was 8 was Mia Hamm. I loved her. I was obsessed with her. So that's really cool that you said that. So you basically got your start into sports journalism through that avenue. And then you had a pretty interesting opportunity to write a book about David Beckham, who at the time was also at the height of his fame, probably in his playing career. What was that like? Can you walk us through that?
I mean, it was a really good experience just for me in my career. And probably that book, The Beckham Experiment, is the single piece of my work that I'm most proud of in my career, for a lot of reasons. Because, I had never done a book before. I was approached by a publisher in 2007, the year that Beckham came to Los Angeles with his family, and they wanted me to follow that first sort of half season in LA. And that truly was one of the cultural events of the summer of 2007 in the United States. Was not just David arriving, but his wife, Posh Spice, arriving to Hollywood, and they were having these A-list parties with basically Hollywood royalty at these events. And then David was going to play soccer as well. And so I agreed to do the book. A challenge because I was living in Baltimore on the East Coast at the time, and this team was in Los Angeles. So I was crossing the country a ton just to be around the team. And it was interesting the way it worked out. So we had to change our plans because Beckham arrived injured and was injured most of that first half season. So we pushed the book back 1 year. And then I spent the entire 2008 season following the team. And I've never been farther inside a team in my entire career. And I knew David because I had done 2 big stories on him for Sports Illustrated magazine before he even came in 2007. So I did a big one in 2003, sort of introducing him to the American public in a major publication, and interviewed him for the first time in New York. Had a really good experience. I know they liked the story. I enjoyed doing the story. And then did another big cover story for Sports Illustrated in 2007, where I went to Madrid when he was still finishing up there. And we did a big interview, big photo shoot. I think it's still the only time MLS has ever been on the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine still. And so we had a good relationship. But what was interesting was that for the book project, I think in Europe and in the UK, it's a little different than in the US, where they view projects book-wise as either authorized or unauthorized, and so there's sort of nothing in between. Whereas what I was doing was the in between. I was asking people inside the galaxy, players, coaches. Alexi Lalas was the general manager at the time, to give me one-on-one access that I had sort of built up enough respect over the years to get that for my own book project. And so everyone inside the galaxy spoke to me one-on-one for the book over time, even when things weren't going well, and they did not go well on the field the first couple seasons before he ended up winning championships. And so Beckham's people wanted, if they were going to participate, a large sum of money, which I wasn't prepared to do, and it was a journalistic thing. So, and then even if they had gotten that, they wanted control over what was in the book. When you cover a team for a long period of time, like a season or two, you don't know how the team's going to do. And I had no idea. I just wanted to follow the story. And what happened over those first 2 years was that Beckham's arrival completely changed the lives of so many people on the LA Galaxy, from star teammates like Landon Donovan to teammates like Alan Gordon, who were making less than $20,000 a year, while Beckham, their teammate, was making $50 million a year, including endorsements at the time. And what happens when they all go out to dinner on a road trip before a game and the check comes? Like, half the guys wanted David Beckham to pay for the entire thing. Half the guys were like, my money's as good as his money. And it was a very unique situation in that sense. And so I followed all of those things sort of on and off the field. That's what the book ended up being. The only thing that was a little unfortunate, I thought, was that they were really bad, the Galaxy, those first 2 years. That's what the book's about. And then they hired Bruce Arena to replace Ruud Gullit and Alexi Lalas as like the one guy running the team. And they won championships. So you can look at David's career in MLS as being successful, as I currently do. And it was a little unfortunate I wasn't able to follow his team for 5 years for a book. It's just that wasn't workable.
Did you feel this big responsibility or any pressure at all, knowing that you're writing a book about David Beckham and that it was going to be viewed by millions?
Um, I mean, pressure only in the sense that it needed to be good, and I needed to be bulletproof in my reporting because,
Yeah.
especially when you get into, Landon Donovan was very critical of David Beckham in that book, and they eventually patched things up and were good teammates, and that's an interesting story as well. But like anytime you're quoting people being critical of the arguably most famous person in the world who presumably has a lot of lawyers, like you've got to be solid in
Yeah.
your reporting. But like here's an example of how crazy it got. Like when Beckham arrived, a couple of weeks into it, Landon Donovan gave up the captain's armband and made a
Mhm.
public thing about it. And Beckham ends up getting the armband. And Landon said publicly, this was my decision. I ended up reporting sort of behind the scenes and finding out that it was actually Beckham's advisors who had brought up this topic with Alexi Lalas, the president of the team, and Frank Yallop, who was the coach, when they had visited in Spain. And then Alexi spoke to Landon privately and said, let him be the captain, you be the star, was the quote. And so there was this whole drama behind the scenes that led to Donovan giving up the armband that wasn't what the public was actually hearing. And so there are a lot of examples like this that I uncovered over time. And it reminded me that there's always behind the scenes so much of a deeper story than what we're actually seeing in day-to-day journalistic coverage.
Yeah.
But what was crazy was I was the one who told Landon about what had happened behind the scenes with Beckham's people going to Galaxy people to get Landon to give up the armband, because he didn't know that story. He thought Alexi had come to him on his own. And so the reporting process was really interesting. I would learn things. And so I would sit down with Landon or other players on the team one-on-one, spend the first few minutes telling them what I had learned, which in some cases they didn't even know about their own team. And then they would fill me in on what they had learned. And it was sort of a two-way process, which is, I think, partly why I was able to get so much behind the scenes stuff for that book.
That is crazy. My mind is blown right now. So do you think that really a lot of the articles that come out, and I'm thinking of a specific example was last season when Frank Lampard got sacked, and there were all these articles coming out, and we didn't know what to believe. Do you think that there's always pieces behind the scenes that us, the public, really are never truly going to know?
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, it's the nature of media, and very much we live in a instant 24-hour news cycle, and there's always something new to go on to. And a lot of times it's not in the interest of the people involved for the full story to get out
Mhm.
publicly. But for that book, it was just such a revealing experience for me, because in my magazine writing career, typically when I did a story, I would parachute in for, 3 or 4 days in a situation where a team or a player was doing well, right? Because you don't usually come in when things are going really badly. And people want to talk to you and you tell your story. But that book was the first time that I was embedded with a team for an entire season or more, through the good times and the bad times. And so it's in the bad times sometimes that I wasn't used to being involved in that in my career, and learned a lot from how people responded that I was covering to those types of things.
And it must have been really difficult to navigate that type of situation, and you don't want to necessarily push any buttons or have things blow up because it could have absolutely massive consequences as well.
Yeah, I mean, the book project was interesting because, unlike my daily, weekly journalism career at that point, there wasn't a story coming out the week after. And so a lot of times my interviews for the book would begin with the interviewee saying, is this interview for your book or for Sports Illustrated? And if I told them it was for the book, they would tell me more. than they would if it had been for that week's magazine. What was interesting, I thought psychologically, was we were still on the record. I was still recording the interview.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
eventually it was going to come out. It's just that they seemed to be more comfortable with not coming out for quite a while. And that part was something, there's so many things I learned from that whole process.
That's so interesting, and I feel so privileged to be able to speak to you about it and learn about it. I do want to ask, I mean, I feel like we could talk about this for ages, but I do have so many other questions that I want to ask you. You've worked a ton of World Cups and Olympics, as you hinted to previously. So can you give us any insight into what that experience is like? How do you prepare for these massive occasions? What does a typical day or week look like when you're reporting, for example, at the World Cup?
I mean, I don't know if other soccer football journalists are like this. They probably are to some extent. I sort of like measure my life in 4-year cycles of connected to the World Cup. It's just kind of the way it works because it's such a big event in your life to go and cover a World Cup, whether it's men's or women's, if you're an American, because basically what you're doing is taking more than a month to go to another country. And that becomes this all-consuming thing every single day. And there's so much attention being given to it. And, for me, it's as I've gotten into more platforms over the years, it becomes a little bit more of a challenge to try and do everything and keep my sanity, because like it's not a sprint. It is a marathon to cover a World Cup. So like the last men's World Cup in 2018 in Russia, I was doing writing for Sports Illustrated magazine and website. I was doing a daily podcast, and I was doing television for Fox Sports, which was the rights holder in the US in English, and was on a nightly show for that in Red Square. And it was a little different because the US men didn't qualify for that tournament. So I wasn't sort of embedded with the US team. I needed to be on top of everything. And I also try and watch as many games as possible during a World Cup so that I can comfortably talk about what's happening in the tournament, because you can't fake that. And so I always am sort of hyper scheduled for every single day, including like finding a routine of like when I eat, because like it's a huge challenge just to remember to eat, to not get sick. I got terribly sick during my first World Cup in France in '98, which just made life really difficult. And there's so many people obviously who are like, it's a challenge to not get sick. So you need to get enough sleep. I try to get at least 6 hours a night. And then I have a calendar for each day of, the games, so I can watch them. What's my routine going to be? So in that 2018 World Cup, I would write a daily column for the Sports Illustrated website, like my 5 thoughts on the day. Would watch all the games in Red Square at the Fox location. We would record our video or our television show at like, I don't know, midnight to 3 a.m. local, to the point where like the sun was coming up in Red Square because it was summer and just the way things worked. And I would record a podcast with my partner every night at the end of the game. So that was a challenge to like do all of that. And in the end, in 2018, I didn't go to a single stadium. I was in the Red Square studio for Fox every single day, just because the more time you spend traveling is time that you're not producing content of some sort. And so like, it was just, I've gotten pretty good at juggling different balls in the air during a tournament like that, which is kind of what you need to do in the modern media landscape.
I can't even imagine, because just with Chelsea, I get so tired with the content that I produce for that. So I can imagine how difficult it must be. Are you going to the 2022 World? It's happening. I didn't even realize, like, oh, it's this year. It's happening. It's here. Are you
Right.
going to Qatar?
I will be there. And I love World Cups. You know, it's my favorite sporting event in the world. I love the Olympics as well, but the Olympics is different because there's so many different sports going on at the same time all the time. Whereas with the World Cup, everyone's eyes are focused on
Mhm.
the same thing at the
Mhm.
same time. And it just feels really powerful. Like for me, I've always compared it, it's like being at the center, it feels like the center of the universe when you're on the ground at a World Cup.
Wow.
And um, so I absolutely love it. I've been to Qatar once back in 2013 for a story. Um, and it's an unusual place. You know, I certainly cover not just the sporting side, but all of the other aspects connected to the World Cup and a World Cup in Qatar, which includes how they treat migrant workers, human rights, women, LGBTQ, all those issues, which I think are
Mhm.
really important. Um, and so I'm trying to get my reporting done on those topics between now and the World Cup, because once I'm on the ground to cover the World Cup, I know that my reporting is going to be all about the soccer basically.
Mhm.
But those other aspects are really important too.
Of course. And kind of speaking about the World Cup, the US men's national team is currently trying to qualify. They're in a pretty good position as well. Are they qualifying for the World Cup this year, do you think?
I think they will. You know, they're definitely on track to do that. You and I are talking after match day 9 of 14 in qualifying. The U.S. is in second place, 1 point behind Canada, one ahead of Mexico. As long as the U.S. finishes in the top 3, they'll get an automatic bid. There's a lot of I think there's a post-traumatic stress situation with the U.S.
It
fan base after not qualifying for 2018. And
was
so,
shocking. It was
you
shocking.
know, it was the biggest failure in U.S. soccer history,
Yeah.
and frankly, it's really hard for given the advancements in U.S. soccer over the years. It's pretty tough for them not to qualify out of CONCACAF just because there's so much margin for error, much more
Mhm.
so than there is in European qualifying
Yeah.
or African qualifying. So a lot of bad things over a long period of time had to happen for the U.S. not to qualify for 2018. That does not appear to be happening this time around, and that's good for the sport in the U.S. because we're still creating new soccer fans all the time in the
Mhm.
United States. This is not a mature soccer market yet. Every World Cup creates probably, I would say, millions of new soccer fans in the United States. This big event, and if the U.S. men don't make it, that's just a huge missed opportunity. So, um, I think they'll end up getting there. And then the question is, how will they do once they get there? But after all of the disappointment of not making 2018, there's a lot of optimism around this U.S. team right now, just because there's a lot of young players. It's a very young team, and yet it's sort of unprecedented how many are, for the U.S. at least, how many are playing at big name clubs, whether
Mhm.
it's Chelsea, Barcelona, Juventus, Leipzig, Dortmund, places like that. So um, they're still, because they're young, getting their first experience together as a national team in difficult environments around CONCACAF, and they missed time because of COVID. They can get, they missed basically a year and a half of not getting many games together.
Yeah.
So, so we'll see. But there's a lot of optimism, and then long term, everyone's looking to 2026 and the U.S. co-hosting that World Cup, and that team potentially going on a deep run.
Oh, I hope I can make it to that one. That would be insane. That would be so, so cool. Uh, Obviously, I do want to ask you one question because my subscribers are mostly Chelsea fans. How important do you think Christian Pulisic is to the US men's national team? I know he played believe it was yesterday, and he ended up drifting a teensy bit more centrally even and not looking like his strongest self. I think this could possibly be due to his playing time at Chelsea as well, and he really has not been getting many minutes under Thomas Tuchel. So do you think that that's affected him at all?
I do, and I think there are some concerns about Pulisic. He's he's upfront about it. He wishes he were playing more at Chelsea. He said that here this week. When he has been playing, it's often not in his best positions.
Mm-hmm.
It's been frustrating. He's been injured at times, as he has been sort of at various points in his career. He has these moments where he has shown how good he can be. Whether that's scoring in a Champions League semifinal at Real Madrid or the form he was in right after the pandemic break for Chelsea. I mean, he was just absolutely terrific. Even before the pandemic, he had a run for a while when he was very good for Chelsea. So he's
He was also
capable of doing it.
for left side. Sorry to interrupt you. He was
Yeah.
also playing under Lampard as a left winger, and I think that that's probably the biggest issue right now is he's not playing on the left wing.
Everybody assumed when Chelsea hired Tuchel, who's obviously been very successful, that, this is good for Christian Pulisic because Tuchel knows him from Dortmund. But at Dortmund, Tuchel never really started Pulisic very often, and we've kind of seen that again. So I think that's something to keep in mind. I don't think Pulisic necessarily embraces the spotlight and the attention on him, and that's just who he is. He's been pretty upfront, though, over the last year about pressure and mental health. And, I know he's got so many fans here in the U.S. who just want to see him happy and enjoying the game. And I don't get the sense right now that he is that much. This was one of his off games for the U.S. Against El Salvador, and he was subbed out in the 65th minute and probably should have been. He wasn't very good. He drifted in, like you said, very centrally and didn't spend much time wide left, and was dispossessed a lot. So you hope he has a better game against Canada, which suddenly is a very big game on Sunday. And he's certainly capable of turning it around. He's still a very young guy.
Yeah, I think we forget how young he is as well because he's the captain of the US team and he's done a lot and he's accomplished a lot for his age, but he's the same age as the Chelsea Academy graduates. They're all in the same group there. I want to be cognizant of your time, so just one final question. If you had any advice for somebody who's trying to get into sports media, sports journalism, what would it be?
There are always going to be, even as the media landscape is constantly changes, sort of important skills that will always be really important. And I would just say try to focus on those things and developing those skills. And that gets into storytelling, being able to write, or if you're storytelling in other mediums, just knowing how to tell a story well is always going to be really valuable. I always encourage people to learn another language besides the one that they speak, because especially in soccer, football, you're going to be using different languages, and it can be a really powerful benefit to you. I speak Spanish. I do interviews in Spanish now. I'm going to be doing work on, I'm going to be on Spanish language television, Telemundo, talking about the U.S. game next week. So it's important to be able to do that. In the United States with soccer, Spanish would be that language. It's less helpful than speaking French or German or something. But, I just think learning a foreign language can be extremely helpful and will be no matter what the future holds in terms of the media.
Yeah, look at me. I moved to Madrid and I never thought I would. So you never know what's in store for you either.
Nice.
But Grant, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, so I have all my writing is on a subscription site at grantwahl.com. We have free posts, we have paid posts, and that's the big thing I'm working on right now, among other things. I'm on Twitter at Grant Wahl, pretty easy to find there.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for joining, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this interview. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below. And yeah, hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, I'm out. Bye.